we really need, it wasn't on air, it was administrative, and he said, we really need people here who can raise money, who can do this, who can do that. And he sort of took me under his wing, and then when he left, he suggested that I become the manager, and I stayed there for 5 years. And then I branched out myself and started doing radio dramas, and then eventually moved into television.
Okay.
And independent film.
But how did you and Carol hook up?
From WBAI.
From BAI.
And I got my first job in radio from Steve as an on-air announcer in 68, when they had virtually no women on the air. And I always joke, maybe it's not such a joke, that I was in the right place at the right time, and I sounded like a man, so I was the perfect person to go on the air.
That's interesting, and but having been hired by him and having been at the station in '68, why are you not in the film? Why are you an executive producer?
I'm camera shy.
Okay.
Turn that off.
She is.
So
I asked her many times to be in the film.
And so we're glad to have you here to be able to comment on the film and on Steve. So when did the film idea come together?
I'm sorry?
The film idea, the idea to do the film on Steve. When did that come together?
Well, it just so happened, Carol and I were having dinner, and we started talking about WBAI and how this one, that one. And I said to her, Steve gave me my first job in radio. And she said, me too. So she said, why don't we team up and do a film together on his life? And that's how it began. And since we had access to his wife, to all his friends, and all the people at WBAI, because I was at the station for a long time. I was the manager for a number of years. And we had access to everything. And we convinced Laura that we were the right people to do this film. And she gave us access to everything, all the archives, all the letters, photographs, everything you can imagine that would have cost a fortune. She gave it to us to use in the film, and gave us access to something like 350 hours of tape, audio tape, that we had access to.
Okay, so you said you branched out into radio drama. When did you get into filmmaking?
I got into filmmaking about, I think Clinton was president when I finally got into it. It's a strange story how I began. I wanted to go into independent film, and I got the opportunity that's a whole other story, but just in a nutshell, to do a film on Mikhail Gorbachev. And when I told the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that I was going to do a radio piece, plus I wanted to branch out and do a film, they gave me the money to do it. And they put a lot of hope that this film would come out okay, and it did. It was the beginning of a 3-part series on Russia, and I was going back and forth to Moscow a lot. And that's how it started, and I've been in poverty ever since.
Welcome to the world of filmmaking. So. Let's get into making the film now, because the obvious challenge is you have access to all these tapes, you have his voice, you have other people to comment on him, right. But how do you visualize something when you just have the voice?
Yeah.
So
well,
I was taken by, of course, the graphics and the animation and the other things, but you're making a lot of choices about certain images and other things you use, and you actually hired actors to do the Chicken Delight eating.
Yes.
So, can you talk about that, about the decision-making for that? Were you both involved in the decision-making on that?
To some degree. Well, because I knew Steve, I worked with Steve personally, and you knew him too, but you didn't really work with him at that time on the air. So we had different experiences of Steve. So I think I had a little influence when I would say to you, well, you have to use this, but a lot of times that could not come to fruition because the sound quality was really not good enough.
She often scared me, so I had to use certain things. She could be very intimidating.
But that's the snippets of tape you're going to use.
Yeah.
Right.
So I used the audio tape, and I would listen all the time. I would just sit there, and while I was cooking, I would listen to the tapes and see which I think was relevant, which would translate into today's world to some degree. I didn't want to present something that was so very unconnected to today that young people couldn't identify with it or be interested in it. I didn't just make it for the WBAI crowd, the older crowd. I wanted other people to see the history of radio and to see the history of free-form radio, which, brought about people like Howard Stern. So when I would listen, I would just sit there and think, well, this particular piece deserves this kind of visual. And I would go through many archives, not only the Steve Post archives, but I went to all the houses, the Getty Images, the Pond 5. I looked for things that were metaphorical, some things that were not literal. And I looked for things that would balance out. Steve gave us the voice, he gave us the story, but this is a visual medium, so I had to go into, into all different kinds of archives to see what we could do to back it up to make a film. The easiest one was, for me, and the hardest emotionally, was the one of 9/11.
Right.
Since I lived through 9/11 and I lived right there, lost my home for a few weeks. And I went down many times to the memorial to see how it grabbed me. What did I want to do there? And the song of "Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel" just worked for me. And it worked because one of the people who was in it was named Daniel. So you find those things, those little corners that you can grab onto, that you can develop into something from your storyline. And it took a long time. It took a very long time.
I can see that as being the
Yeah.
biggest challenge of the job. I mean, yes, sorting through the different things to get the best insight into what
Yeah.
his character was like
Right.
from the audio tapes, but then getting that matched up. And you can't always have access to pictures of him, but you have to have pictures of the era, and
That's
then
right.
the graphic things that work
Right.
better than the pictures and so forth.
That's
That
right.
seems like a monumental challenge.
And I knew I wanted to do the story of his walking on the ledge. I mean, that's a classic story.
I couldn't watch it. Just even the
It was
animation.
animation.
Just even the animation was just like.
There were no pictures of it. Nobody took a camera and taped him as he was walking on the ledge.
Today, he would have had his cell phone out while he was doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right. So we animated it, obviously, and we wanted to make some of it funny with this big Steve sign in the point, and as realistic as possible in terms of getting the image of the building, how high up it was, and what he did. I mean, to the best of our knowledge, it's exactly how he did it. So we followed the story, and he, by the way, did that story about 10 different times on the air. So what you hear is not one straight piece.
It's cut together.
I took it from different
Right.
pieces that made it funnier or made it, savvy in some way.
No, it was very compelling, and I think that back to 9/11, the fact of having access to his story about Steve, the superintendent, who was the bomb squad detective,
Yeah.
and having him, Steve, the bomb squad detective, there, and having the song and having the story be told, and in real time, him listening to the story and its effect on him.
Steve Burbridge, the detective, the bomb squad detective, I let him, when he came into the studio and I was taping him, I was interviewing him, and I said, I want you to listen to the tape. He said, I've never heard it. I said, yes, I know. You've never heard it. So I said, just sit there and listen. And then he started to cry.
Right.
And he was very taken by the whole thing.
And it's not only 9/11 in that aspect, but it's also the fact of actually seeing in real time how Steve could affect somebody.
Yes.
By
yes.
telling a story necessarily. In that story, it was the other Steve's actual story.
Right.
But in other cases, it's stories about himself. But you
Right.
can imagine from that how it affects other people.
Debbie the blind transsexual.
Right.
I mean, I love that story. This was a woman who called him up off air, and he talked to her, and finally they got to be fairly close. And he said, I'd like to meet you. And she came up, and they did I think 2 programs altogether. I don't quite remember. But this was a man, we're talking about 1968.
Right.
And he has transgender women on his show. This was groundbreaking at the time,
I understand that, and I think the image is very strong there. It brings up another point for me, which was a lot of his different points of view that were outspoken on anti-war, on Nixon, on civil rights with Ruskin, with what
James
about
Lester.
Yeah, and what about AIDS? Did he take on AIDS? Did he take on the caring about AIDS while he was on the air, and we just didn't have that section, or
Yeah.
was he not outspoken about that? I was going to ask Carol about
Well,
that.
I don't recall any specific time that he was outspoken. That said, Ira Epstein died of AIDS in 1989, and we were all very, very close friends. And he was like one of my best friends.
Right.
So on the air, I just don't know the answer.
It just seems like the kind of thing, given the transsexuals,
Yeah.
given the war things, given that sort of perspective on life, that you would think that he might have.
You're absolutely right, but I'm glad you've brought this up, because we were left with 300 hours of tape, as opposed to Bob Fass, who was one of the three founders of 10,000 hours.
Oh,
So there was a lot lost, and at WBAI, people had the habit. There was such a poor station. In order to keep, the tapes going, they would take their tape, their air check, and then they would bulk it, and so they'd lose tape because they had to do it. They had to tape it for a while.
Right.
So that's what they did, and who knows what was lost? But there were much more than 300 hours. There had to be at least 2,000 hours.
I'm sure. And I think that what you gathered and then put together with images is really made for a good story. One of the things that kept occurring to me is the nature of his voice and his diction. I mean, he spoke really, really well. He had a great way of speaking, and also his voice was very all-enveloping. It was one of those great radio voices at a great tone. But I didn't hear a lot of commentary about that. It was more about his personality, about the way he talked and other things. But I think that was one of the more compelling things about him, was that voice and the manner of speaking that he had.
He was told that he should go to voice training school, and he did, and walked out. He hated it. He thought they weren't going to take away whatever he had.
Him.
But his voice was that also because he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and which was eventually what killed him.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, and that in genetical parts. But, okay, so we don't have much time left, but I wonder if we have any questions from the audience right there in the middle.
Yeah,
Well,
where it leads you.
horrible youths. Somebody once said, if anybody had a good time in high school, there'd be no artists. So that's true about a lot of artists in their youths, is that somehow it might trigger something creative, something special in their personalities. I don't know. We have over here.
I'll give you my contact information, and you can call me. We're talking now with a streamer, so we might be streaming it soon, but we might also put it on our own streaming device so that you would come to us and you go to our platform. It's been in now at about 15 different film festivals, and there's going to be a screening sometime in around April or May in upstate New York. It's not Columbia County. I forgot now where it is, but you can certainly contact me, and I can put you on our list, and you can get access to that. There also Canopy. Do you know Canopy? Anybody know Canopy? Okay. All my films are on Canopy, and we're adding this to the list. Again, about 2 or 3 more months it'll take.
It's also going to be in Florida, and how many festivals?
Oh, we have three film festivals in Florida that we're going to. It's gotten into a lot of festivals, even out of New York, which is so interesting to me, that people outside of New York are interested in the film.
Well,
And one in California, too, right?
California, yes, too.
It covers such an interesting era, and it is
And
for
he had
radio.
his pulse on in the era,
And for the rest of the country, New York and the West Coast were where that was breaking out, that kind of radio started from. So I think
Right,
everybody's really
right.
interested in that. One more question, right there.
Yeah. And of course, there's so much left out of the film, but I couldn't put everything into an hour and 90 minutes. It's and yeah, part 2, right?
A sequel.
Some of the people from New York moved to California and Florida.
That's right.
So I'm
Yeah.
saying he was everywhere. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing it to us. And thanks a lot for talking to us today.
Thank you.